2022, US President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act into law. It is the largest investment in clean energy and climate action ever made in the US. The Inflation Reduction Act has reshuffled the economics and geopolitics of the lithium-ion battery industry on the global markets. It is also an important step in our joint efforts to reach the Paris Agreement targets of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So after a year with the Inflation Reduction Act, how has the industry responded? What are the business opportunities in the US, but also in Europe? And what is the status of the immense competition on global markets? This is what we are going to discuss today in today's Nordic Battery Thursday. My name is Jessica Olsson. I am Head of Energy and Transport Europe at Business Sweden, and I'm here today representing the Nordic Collaboration Management team. That is a collaboration between Business Finland, Innovation Norway, and Business Sweden. And we are doing these Nordic Battery Thursdays together with our partner, European Battery Alliance, and it is supported by the Nordic Innovation. And we are proud to have a great panel with us today from Morrow Batteries, from the Finnish Mineral Group, from Volta Trucks, from Recor, and from EIT InnoEnergy. It will be led by Tore Sekkenes from the European Battery Alliance. But first, let me start by introducing Ilka von Dalvik, Policy Manager at EIT InnoEnergy. Ilka, what has the effects been during this last year of the Inflation Reduction Act? Over to you.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you for having us. I try to give a broad overview of our view on effects of the European battery value chain since the launch of the US Inflation Reduction Act that was kindly introduced by Jessica. And starting on the first slide, just to give you a reminder on the amounts of financial incentives that are specific addressed to the battery value chain. This immense climate bill has really three legs, you could say. There are tax incentives for the customers. There are tax incentives for manufacturing, and there on the top you can see the two most critical ones: the advanced manufacturing production tax or production credit, and the other one is the Advanced Energy Project Credit Extension, both that are mutually exclusive but still represent a huge amount of funding that you can get for your battery project. On the other side, there are also incentives to boost the uptake of EVs. This is done by customer credits, and that can amount up to $7,500 per EV. But, and that is one of the beauties, I think, of the IRA, they are combined also with domestic requirements, meaning that the full amount of credits are based on a number of requirements. Some are tied to local production and sourcing of both critical materials and battery components, and that either needs to be produced into in the US or in other countries where the US has free trade agreements with. Those requirements, they sound very good, and I think are one of the main boosts for domestic projects within the US. But it should also be remembered that it's quite tricky to fulfill them already from the start, and they came already into force this year, and they will become more stringent over time. Until 2029, you have to get the full credits to have 100% of the battery components produced in the US and up to 80% of the materials sourced in the US or in friendly countries. And this is a challenge. Out of 97 car models available in the US, only 18 qualify for the credits today. And looking at how the requirements will become more stringent, I think there is a challenging ramping up to do for the US economy. But what do all those incentives mean for battery production? We had a look at average battery pack prices pre-IRA. You can see that China has managed to lower the costs compared to both US and Europe already before the IRA was introduced. But thanks to the enormous amounts of subsidies, both through the IRA but also other US DOE grants, US is now on par with China, lowering production costs with about 28 to 30%. The situation for Europe in the meantime worsened as well due to the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, meaning that electricity prices even rose in Europe, putting Europe at a quite disadvantaged level compared to both China and Europe in this time. And looking at electricity costs, one of the long-term effects that have been predicted, and that is not often talked about, but I think is very critical, is the impact on the levelized cost of electricity that is foreseen to be lowered dramatically thanks to the effects of the IRA. And especially for renewable energies, as you can see in the study from Copenhagen Economics, they almost predict it to be around zero for renewable energy in the years going forward. And looking at what we just told about electricity prices in Europe, it's of course a challenging situation for us. But did the IRA already have an effect in the first year of its implementation? And I would say, yes, it has. And we can see this in a number of announcements. On the left-hand side, you see a graph of installed capacity forecasts, where the projects in the US really have been dramatically increased, where it is somewhat stagnated in Europe. A lot of numbers of investments along the entire battery value chain, creation of jobs. There are several studies pointing towards that they're an immediate and direct effect of the IRA. And I think we will see even more of this in the future. Looking a little bit more detail on, especially focusing on cell production, we made a comparison of announcements from last year, August 22, and compared this to announcements in August 23 this year. And as you can see, those numbers, they are predictions or forecasts for 2022, 2025, and 2030, both in Europe and in the US. Those numbers rise, which is, of course, a very positive news. But looking at a comparison, you see that the US is really catching up with Europe, and even now managed to pass Europe in terms of announced cell production sites. The number of cell manufacturers or cell gigafactories, you could tell them, they rose from 22 in 22 up to 36 announced projects in 23, whereas Europe's is still wiggling around 29, 30 of the more credible projects. But what is more interesting, I would see, if you're looking at the short term up to 2025, which is a sign of worry, I think, for Europe, because here you see the number of both announced projects and capacity that is forecasted to be reduced. And that is an effect that I think has not only the IRA as a reason. We've seen, however, investments being diverted to the US, but I think it's also a reflection that many of the European projects that already started before the IRA now facing a lot of problems in scaling up, finding investments, finding the experts and skill. And I think this is also something to keep in mind, that what we look at are predictions, and the verdict is still out there if all the projects getting realized. And this steep learning curve, I think, is also something to have to keep in mind for Europe. Looking at the European response, as Jessica introduced, it really shook up the ecosystem, and I think Europe has had a problem of finding one single answer to respond to the IRA, and this is mainly due to the fact that Europe, as you can see on the map, consists of many countries. And one of the greatest assets that we have and want to protect is the single market. And to protect it, Europe made up a number of rules. One of them is state aid should not be freely given, because this will be a big favor for financially strong countries compared to other countries that do not have those financial muscles. So instead of having one single answer, you could say the Green Deal industrial plan consists of many different measures that you see on the picture. You have the temporary crisis and transition framework, which is a sort of relaxation of state aid. There's also a matching clause that allows actually member states to match funding that companies would have gotten elsewhere outside Europe. The verdict is still out there how this works. It is not as simple as pragmatic as the IRA, but I think it's at least a good tool. Then there are a couple of other proposals that I just wanted to mention. The Critical Raw Material Act is also a response looking at to secure and develop more resilient supply chains in this new changed geopolitical landscape. We have the Net Zero Industry Act that really looks at how to boost the green tech sector. And finally, that has not been a lot in the press, is a proposal for a new regulation to establish a Strategic Technologies for Europe platform called STEP, which will be a European funding instrument. I think this is a very important tool, because most of the other ones, the Critical Raw Materials Act and the Net Zero Industry Act, they have nice targets, but they are not tied to any financial incentives. A quick comparison then between what is offered by the IRA and what is promoted by Europe is there are clear differences, as you can see. The US IRA relies a lot on the financial incentives to boost clean tech projects, whereas Europe more tries to push on the regulatory side. They try to ease permitting, they try to develop other means to protect the market by introducing a lot of sustainability requirements as well. And also when it comes to funding to get the project off the ground, there is a very large difference, I would say, between the two regions. Europe focuses a lot on research and innovation, whereas US really puts the development of a supply chain first, giving money to projects to ramp up and scale up, and this is something where we see lacks in Europe. And this picture, I think, is a good basis for further discussion in the panel later as well. Both models have their advantages and disadvantages. So I'm really looking forward to talk to the industry later on this one. But looking a little bit ahead, what is the future? We still see that the IRA managed to fill the supply-demand gap thanks to the IRA, whereas Europe still has an undersupply of battery cells, as you can see in the left side, whereas China still has an oversupply. This is good news and bad news for Europe, because it means that we will also in the future most certainly import battery cells from China. But it also shows that the market will outgrow demand, which is a good signal, I would say, that the European market is still in the forefront and growing. What to do in Europe, filling those gaps in the value chain. Many of you have seen this picture. I think it is still valid to see where the pressure points in the value chain still are. We still need to do a lot more upstream and midstream to get material projects off the ground. The IRA, I think, especially in cell production, and we should be very much on the watch out to keep projects growing, especially the European champions that currently exist in our value chain. one thing that we haven't so much talked about yet is also the predicaments for the car makers. We already talked about the incentives for the customers in the US, but also lowering the production of a battery cell itself means that the price of the end product, the car, will be much lower in the US compared to Europe. So it is more interesting also for our automakers to look to the West. In the same time, we see an influx of Chinese OEMs coming to Europe as well. So, finalizing, where does the IRA leave us 1 year after its launch? I think there are many good effects for the US. There are some political implications that I think we are also going to discuss, meaning that China will be more oriented towards Europe because they are a country of concern for the US, which means that there will be no cells or EVs allowed from China to enter the US market. So I think that is it's both maybe a threat and opportunity for Europe. Something that also I just want to point out, there are only the 3 regions and countries, US, Europe, and China, that we concentrated on right now, but their effects, of course, they are also important for other countries that currently trying to develop its own supply chain for the battery industry, namely Canada and Australia. Australia made studies showing that they suffer from the same effects as Europe does from the lowered production price, meaning that they will also have difficulties ramping up the refining and processing part. Canada chose a different way. They also offer massive incentives for the industry to come and establish themselves. And they're both suppliers of raw materials and a competitor to both US and Europe, in fact, in their development going forward. So with this global perspective, I would like to finish my presentation and looking forward to our panel that will be led by Tore Sekkenes, Director of the EBA. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive, short but comprehensive presentation, very illustrative of what's going on. So let's now listen to what industry thinks about this IRA, as it's called. I've got the privilege of presenting 4 representatives of the battery value chain, and of course we will still have Ilka with us. I start with Carl Magnus, who is here in the studio with us, founder of Volta Trucks. You have several battery-powered trucks in operation in several European cities, and I mentioned the 2 important ones, Paris and London, of course. Then we have via a link Lars Christian, CEO of battery manufacturing company Morrow in Arendal in Norway. We also have Benoit Lemagnon, who is likewise COE of the battery manufacturing company in France named Vercor, based in Grenoble and in Dunkirk. And then we have, last but not least, Jani Adolfsson Tallqvist, who is development manager at Finnish Mineral Group, namely in Finland, of course, an active investor and engaged in several Finnish battery-related companies like Terrafame, Caliber, CNGR Finland, and others. There are others as well. And Ilka, that has already been presented. So I've split this into 4 blocks, actually, and I kick off by a first part, which is what do you think of this? What is good with IRA and what is negative IRA? Who would like to start?
I think IRA, from a European perspective, has almost acted like a wake-up call. I think we in the West have been a little bit naive over some time, and this that we have shifted a lot of manufacturing to more east has obviously geopolitical consequences, but I also think we have seen effects of the population of our countries. A lot of people in very capable age have been without jobs. And obviously has also political consequences, more extremist and things like that coming up. So I think a kind of a rebalancing of that is a good positive effect. Then we can talk about the different US and Europe, etc. But something has obviously changed if you look at the statistics, what we're doing. And I think obviously Europe has to respond.
We have to respond to that. Let's come to what we should be doing. But I'd like to listen to some of the people online. Lars Christian, please take your comments. I'm very sorry for this interruption. Very sorry.
No. IPCC are saying that we are heading for 1.5 by 2030 or 2035. So if we want to solve the climate issue, then we need to do more of what is actually working within that time frame. And in my view, that is 4 elements. It's hydropower, it's wind, it's solar, and it's batteries. We need hydrogen and CCS and blue and green ammonia, all that kind of stuff, but that comes later. So this is what will make a difference in the short term. This is where the Inflation Reduction Act is extremely forceful in increasing the activity level and driving new technology improvements and whatever have you. Of course, such a huge stimulus will kind of push the limits in the whole supply chain when it comes to manning, capital, minerals, whatever have you. And it will, from that point of view, could say it's have a negative side effect to it. But if you want to solve the climate issue, I think we just welcome those negatives because that means that there are so much positive that is happening. So for me then, looking at Europe, it's also a question of, do Europe also want to solve the climate issue? And if so, they need to be equally forceful in pushing for improvements and more activity in this area. To a certain degree, Europe has been forceful in putting measures in place, different measures. Personally, I like those measures better as a CEO because I think it stimulates to being competitive and having an efficient operations and avoid sort of the complacency aspects of having, just contributions on your bottom line or operating cost. So I think we need more of it. We need more of this to solve the climate issue, and that's where I'm coming from. We can compare and say, well, one is better than the other. Even the European model, I mean, both Benoit and myself will produce batteries and making a profit, despite of what is happening across the ocean in the US. It's just a question of could we have gotten more money by investing in US? Of course. But this company is rooted on European and values, and Europe is our home market, and this is where we are currently.
The second part of this webinar is a comparison between EU and the US battery value chain. And one perspective that I find very interesting is the market. Would you like to comment on that? And please remember that your earlier comments were not sent out, so please go ahead and repeat what you said. But please comment on the market in US vs in Europe. Maybe we start with Jani this time, who has not been able to
Yes. Thank you. I think that the future demand for EVs in the US might be depending on how long the US administration can afford to give the consumers tax credits for buying EVs, and I think that's something that I see that companies should take into account when considering the investments into US and how long they can still maintain the IRA package and how long can they afford it. I don't know. I think we don't have the answer for that, but another perspective to this topic that also is affecting the demand is I see that the what will happen when if there will be a new president elected in 2024, for example, a Republican president. We need to remember that 52% of the IRA budget is going to clean energy investments, and only 4% to EVs. And if the U.S. administration wants to support the oil industry instead of the clean energy, that might be a good incentive to kind of kill the Inflation Reduction Act.
So how?
I think
Please go ahead, Lars-Erik. Lars Christian.
No, just to build on what Jani is saying, it's just an illustration that we really do not know for how long, and shape and form and color even, that the Inflation Reduction Act will have in the short, medium, long term. So I subscribe to what you're saying, and you could also say on the other end of the spectrum is that most of these initiatives are actually in states creating jobs, states that are Republican. So from a climate point of view, perhaps they want to support the oil and gas industry if the Republicans come back in office. But from a job creation in many of these states, then they should just continue pushing for this. So we really do not know. Looking at the market, I would like to sort of point to another difference in this. And in many ways, you could say that the market is broken. Because private capital would pour into opportunities where they're seeing that there are good business opportunities, there are skilled people, and all whatever have you, and the demand is kind of higher than the supply. So then, private money would pour into this, but that's not what we're seeing. It's very cautious, and we need the regulatory system or the governments to help out in that in two dimensions. One is to put frameworks in place and de-risking of many of these projects, risk relief, by also contributing with money. And the reason for that is if we want to fast forward this to solve the climate issue, then we need more than the projects that we're seeing today in Europe and in US and in China. We need even more. So that means that we need to fast forward this, and then that also not only in my case means battery production capacity, but the whole supply chain leading up to, because you need the whole supply of this to work for the end product to be reaching the market. And for this to happen, then we need faster permitting. We can't accept that the governments take 3-4 years to approve a permit. I mean, we're 2030 by the time that these factories are up and running. So I think, which by the way was not the case in our, we got the permit for building the factory behind me. It took them 4 weeks to approve from we applied to the permit was given. But this is very, very serious, actually.
I too.
Both de-risking and permitting, faster permitting needs to happen for us to solve the climate issue.
I totally agree with that statement. Benoit, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, maybe also to make a very quick wrap up on what we discussed when we had a break. I think IRA is simple, bold, very pragmatic, and I would say tuned to big corporation. For startups or new companies like Morrow, Northvolt, and the ones like some others, it's a little bit more challenging. However, the temptation is very big to look at it seriously. It comes with a lot of constraints, but typically we are, and this is public, we have announced an agreement with a large battery, US-backed battery maker, and the amount of subsidies they are receiving today to speed up in the lithium ion is really just enormous, and they want us to be a partner with them. So this is something in which we are investing quite a lot. We keep going in Europe, but it's a challenge. I mean, we just referred with Lars Christian to permitting. Permitting is something we manage pretty well in Dunkerque. Took 5 months to be granted the permit for the gigafactory. However, on the financing side, it's another story. And it take more like 12, 18, 24 months to be granted some direct subsidy. Even if there is a global political will and push, then the technostructure, the European technostructure is clearly putting a lot of lag in the process and putting the speed of development at risk somehow. I think this is one. The other thing that I would like to share in terms of maturity of the market is that, as always, Europe has been setting the lead China is a little bit ahead in terms of EV switch. For a lot of that is for good political reason. The simple approach to city IC in city limitation that has been very strict in China and speed up development. We see that the US now is keeping the pace, and Europe has been leading it, but we are a little bit in between the pioneering moment and now the transfer from this EV revolution to becoming the majority trend. And we are, my understanding, that in 23 we are in this very moment where there may be some hesitation. People saying, yeah, you know what, if we keep going on EVs, maybe we have a risk of being taken by the Chinese coming into Europe. The US is different. They said, we're going to transfer massively. We put the IRA, but we also put the political will to have robust job in the US. So if you want to sell EVs in the US and battery, you do it in the US. You don't import it. And we put tax duties, import tax duties, and constraint that will clearly prevent cars from Europe or from Asia to be sold easily in the US. And we are in Europe still the larger market, this is clear, but not ambitious enough in terms of protecting the growth of this nascent industry, which we are representative with Carl Magnus, with Lars Christian, with Verkor, with Northvolt, to give this industry the time to grow. It will need some time for sure, but it will be long-term a fantastic opportunity to create an industry that will be very competitive and giving at the same time a contribution to climate change, of course, and limiting its impact, contribution to long-term good jobs in Europe, and also, of course, a contribution to localization of those industrial activities that we need and the whole value chain. I would stay short, but this is my comment. So we are in the middle of the river crossing here, and we need to keep pushing and accelerate to capture this early mover advantage that Europe has had, and we need to somehow put the new speed and keep going to make sure that we are not outpaced by the speed at which, of course, China is, but also now the US are starting to be.
Thank you very much, Benoit. Ilka, can you please comment on what we're hearing?
Yes, thank you, too. And I wanted to catch up on Benoit's description, and I think a reflection on how vulnerable the European industry still is. And what the IRA does is close the doors to Chinese investment, but it leaves the door open for Europe's. And this is what we have been seeing. The European players now eye the US as a more interesting place for investment. And there are some examples both on the cell production side, but there was also a recent survey by German auto suppliers that found that not a single one wanted to increase their investment in the home market. And that for Germany, with the Mittelstand and the industrial engine of Europe, I think this is really a wake-up call, because now people that are still trying to grow, they don't have the muscles to do it everywhere, both in Europe and the US. And given that the time window of all the tax credits in the US is limited, we see currently that a lot of the investments are moving westwards, putting European projects on the back burner. And I think it was Janne described also the difficulties to get those financing, the support really for this upscaling and to de-risk the project. So I think this is something really where Europe should be on the watch out how to mitigate.
Yes, I think that's what we heard, the comment from Lars Christian. We need to release this private funding for there needs to be a signal to the European market to release funds for this industry. I pick up on one thing, not wanting to go into geopolitics, of course, but the fact that the Chinese companies, which, by the way, have a lot, perhaps the largest experience on making batteries, they are not, unfortunately, not so welcome in the US. Maybe that's an opportunity for us here in Europe, because I believe that the Chinese have a lot of strength in what, for sure they do, and that they would come to Europe. Would you comment on that?
Yes, I can comment on that, and I think it is both a threat and an opportunity. I mentioned in my presentation that we see currently a larger influx also on the end products. So China is now competing also in the EV segment with European players, and I think that is a development that is quite worrisome. But when it comes to cell production, the structure of how this is going to be developed in the US is a little bit different from Europe, what we see. In the US, often a larger automotive companies joins forces with an Asian player, not Chinese, but Korean and Japanese, and they both build those factories together, whereas in Europe, they're more isolated and they have offtake agreements, but we do not see the strong connections between a cell manufacturing and an automotive company. I think this is certainly one road that could be explored. What is important, though, is really to make certain that the IP and the jobs developed stay within Europe, so that we do not get another dependency that we wanted to avoid and imports us then into Europe.
Yes. You and I have seen, in fact, there is, despite the fact that we're talking about more investments in the US, but we have seen interest from China to come to Europe, and there are many Chinese companies already active in Europe. Jani, you have experience from the CNGR cooperation. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I think that we need all the investments, especially for the battery chemicals into Europe that we can get, and you know, our European players in that field, they have limited resources, and of course, so we need also to have the Chinese players, which are market leaders in the battery chemicals industry. So I think that it felt for us as a good thing to bring those investments into Europe and for us into Finland, or it's no final investment decision yet.
Thank you very much.
I would also just want to comment, if I may, on that. For me,
Please.
It's a great opportunity to attract Asian partners to help us grow the value chain in Europe. Knowing that, I think it's important to state from the beginning that it's a mirroring effect at what the European industry has been doing in China, be it for aeronautics, for aerospace, for car industry in the past. That this has to be led jointly with GV, in which there is a clear vision sharing, but also control sharing to help grow and localize this industry for the long term. And if this is clearly stated, and this is what we are doing in Dunkirk, onboarding partners jointly with other big players for pre-cam, for cathode, for recycling, for foils, for electrolytes, for solvent recycling also. I believe this is the way to speed up the capacity building that we need, and to do that for the long term with partners that have, to be honest, not a huge experience gap, because we are speaking of 5 to 10 years maximum, but have a little bit of an advance that we clearly want to integrate to cope with that speed and build the value chain together. So I do see this at the same time as a great opportunity, knowing that, as always, it should not be seen as a walk in the park for any player to expand abroad. And it is historically, it has been true for European companies, be it in Asia or in the US. It's the same for Chinese companies, that it's not a walk in the park to start a factory in Germany, in Poland, or in France. And this is where there is a win-win approach, and this is a type of discussion we are clearly entertaining.
Thank you very much. Okay, we are closing getting closer to the end of this presentation, and I would kindly ask for some comments that you probably discuss in your boardrooms. I'm sure you cannot say everything, but could you please give an indication of how is your relation with IRA? What are you going to try to benefit from this in some shape or form? Maybe I start with you, Benoit. What are your plans vis-à-vis the IRA?
So as I said earlier, I think plans is first to leverage IRA to make the European policymakers understand that we are not alone in the universe and that we need to keep the pace. I think this is first and foremost what we are doing, because we are European by nature and we want to pursue and grow in Europe. We believe this is the largest market by far for now, and this is where we want to play a role jointly with others. The second part of it is to prepare for the future by leveraging partnership, long-term and robust partnership, to expand that European technology and industrialization that we are leveraging with the US or North American continent, I would say, by using the IRA as a Kickstarter. So this is a two side of the same coin that we are now building around this IRA, knowing, and I'm completely aligned with Lars Christian and Gianni and Carl Magnus, that what a law has done, a law can stop it. And we know that the political dimension of the IRA is very important, and this can also be reversed, probably not overnight, but we anticipate that this cannot last forever. So this is the situation. It's an opportunity to complement what we are stating here, but as always at Verkor, going really step by step and not trying to do everything at the same time.
Thank you. Carl Magnus, what are your reflections on IRA?
Well, firstly, we're a European company right now, and we want to service the European markets first. I mean, we're now established in 10 countries, and we're starting the journey. As maybe you mentioned, we're producing a mid-duty truck, so it's not an object that you easily move, I mean, over continents. So it makes all the sense for us to produce in Europe. And we have looked at the US. I mean, it's in our roadmap going forward. And at the time, obviously, we want to have as much as production locally as possible for a number of reasons. I mean, you have the security of the supply chain system, but also sustainability. I mean, a lot of transport all over the world is not good from a sustainability point of view. So for us, IRA so far, we see it, of course, but we don't see it really starting a competitive threat really in Europe. We would like to have much more of our supply chain locally. So, I mean, obviously, anything that Europe can do to facilitate this transition, I think is good for everybody. And when we look at population-wise, obviously Europe has a very big population, so that we have local supply for all this in cars, in trucks, in vans, etc. I think just makes sense. But I think Europe has to give equal opportunities in a way.
So using it as a wake-up call,
Exactly.
Which is what I hear Benoit saying as well. Gianni, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I can be quite short here because we're a state-owned holding and development company focusing on the mining and the battery value chain, and our mission is to responsibly maximize the value of Finnish minerals. And so our focus has been to make investments in Finland, and it hasn't changed. So we will continue to stay and make investments in Finland, but we hope that the benefits from the renewal of regulatory frameworks and funding mechanisms and permitting in Europe would give us some advantage.
Lars Christian.
Yeah. Just a short comment on capital and human capital, because I find that a lot of people are talking about capital, and it's capital intensive, what we all do in many ways. But people tend to forget the human capital side of it. We are not producing battery cells, neither Benoit or myself, because it's easy. It is because it's hard. And you have to have people that have done it before to succeed. And I think most or many of the projects, both in Europe and in US, will not fly or succeed because they don't have people that have done it before. And you need sort of critical competencies to succeed. Then on the Inflation Reduction Act, whether you take an opportunity of it or not. I mean, if you're a long-established company, then it's easy to take advantage of it. because you have a base load of a revenue stream, and you have a proven track record, everything that gives you comfort that you can do so. In the other end of the spectrum, you could say that you're a really early startup. You haven't decided where to build yet. Of course, then it's easy to jump to US compared to being in Europe, where Benoit and myself are, and I feel many of the other two too, is that kind of we're in a little bit in between, and we need to get to a certain sort of proven track record and operational experience and everything in place before we can take that kind of step out. So what we have discussed is that for us it's opportunistic. So if a customer or a funder comes and say, okay, we want to buy batteries from you and we want to invest in you, if condition that you build a factory somewhere, okay, we will seriously have a look at it. But currently we have the plan that we are having, and we're going to grow much more than the 43 gigawatt that we are currently having as an ambition.
Thank you very much. Those are very encouraging words. Ilka, would you like to have the last part for this conversation?
Thank you. And it's been very interesting to listen to all of the industrial representatives. I think what we clearly can say at IRA, geopolitical challenges, it's not longer business as usual. And I think Europe has to change in its approach on how to de-risk, how to support businesses in the clean tech sector. We at EBA I think this is really high time for us to update the strategic action plan, and some things that we have been looking at is actually a sustainability premium, really to kind of rebalance this global playing field again in the favor to Europe. So shape or form has to be decided, but what I also strongly hear, it needs not only to be coupled to sustainability, but also to IP developed in Europe to maintain our competitiveness in this new world.
Thank you very much for those comments. I think what I've learned in this call is that the IRA is it's here right now. It's got a big impact on what we're doing, and we need to use it as the wake-up call it is. It's good for United States. It's excellent that United States take the environmental problem now seriously. This shows that they do. And with those comments, I think I would like to leave over to Jessica to wrap up this session. Jessica, please.
Thank you very much, Tore, and thank you all for joining us here today on the panel. It's been very, very valuable, and I think for all our listeners and viewers here today to see your comments on this. I took with me a few things. I think it's good we are recording, so it's possible to see everything again, to get all the data with you. 5 things that I took with me is, well, the top line, it's a wake-up call for Europe. I think you said that a lot of times. And what does this mean, this wake-up call? Well, we need to enable private investments and risk relief. So use public funds and policies and frameworks in order to get the private capital working for this, because the goal where we are actually jointly going is larger than all the investments that are on the table today. We need to keep the commitment to environment, and we do that quite harshly, but we need to staff up and pace up permitting to make things go even faster. We're not going to take shortcuts, we just need more people on it and make it faster. We are talking about the opportunities in US. Yes, they are there. We're also talking about you can't do both or many things at the same time. You also need to focus because we're starting up something. So I am happy also to hear this, the will and the engagement and the business profits that you see also staying in Europe. There is a market in Europe. It is still on the lead. It is interesting not only for European companies, but also for investors coming here, also from the US, also from Asia, and so on. Number 4, energy and electricity prices. We need to keep on investing in that. Ilkka, when you are talking about energy prices in the US going towards below zero, and we have a war in Europe pushing prices up, to be competitive, we need to push it down. And we heard wind, solar, hydro is the way to go, and we really need the storage in this system, and that is the batteries, especially if we want to meet these targets in the pace that we need to. And as you were saying in the beginning, this wake-up call, it's also about keeping the jobs in Europe, taking the opportunity of the people that we have here, the educated people that we have, put them into jobs, keep the IP in Europe, and for that, because we need the talent. Whereas Lars Christian was saying, we're not doing this because it's easy. We need talented people to do this job. It's a hard work, but we believe in it. So thank you very much. I think more can be said, but that was 5 things from that. I also want to say to everyone listening in here today that from the Nordic ecosystem, from the companies, from the academia, and from our organizations working here, we want to keep staying in contact with you. We can support and discuss and work with you for partnership for investing in the Nordics, for strategic partnerships on the global market, to do this together, and of course also with research and innovation. And from the Nordic Battery collaboration, we have done quite a few things already this year. We've been, for example, in Japan and in Finland, meeting up on the global markets, but also here in the Nordics. So I think you can see it behind me that we are inviting and hoping to see you at the battery show in the US, at the Future of Batteries in Berlin in Germany, but also invite you to come to Arendal in Norway or come to Skaraborg in Sweden beginning next year. So stay in contact, and thank you all again.